Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be fooling around with different sorts of techniques for creating thatched roofs, so I've ducked out and grabbed a whole bunch of different sorts of supplies. G'day everyone, Viv here. I hope you're all keeping well. Welcome back. I'm really looking forward to playing around with a bunch of new techniques. Some will be new, others I've done in the past, but the first step to make the process easier along the way is just to build a bunch of these MDF roofs. These are the roofs from the village buildings in our Tabula Rasa range, and you can find those on the website. There's a link in the description below. I'm going to try as many different sorts of techniques as I can, and in this video I go through 3 different sorts of techniques, 2 of which work. One of them's a massive failure, but I think that's because I got impatient. I start off just by pulling out clumps of these bristles from a hard nylon brush and just simply gluing them straight onto the MDF with some hot glue. This doesn't really work out very well. The bristles are held together, they're folded over and held together by a little metal clip. So once you remove that metal clip, the bristles tend to fan out a little bit and you end up with this, fan sort of shape. So to help combat that, I go through a bunch of different sorts of techniques. Most of them involve putting some hot glue along a strip of these nylon bristles that have, been roughly straightened out so that they're parallel. And it takes me hours. I spend so long messing around with this. It was just a frustrating process. I tried lots of different sorts of techniques, including putting some hot glue on the table and then standing some bristles up into that, and trying to flatten out some bristles in my fingers and apply some hot glue and squeeze that. After ages of, experimenting and burning my fingers, I finally decided I could build this little contraption that might make it easier for me to build these sorts of leaves or sheaths of thatching, I guess. And it works. It works really, really well. Whilst in this experiment, the end result isn't, a success, that paper sheath around the end of the bristles makes it so much easier to build in this fashion. I think, the biggest hiccup that I had, and we'll see, is the roof ridge. I go through a bunch of different sorts of things, but, I'm glad that I built that contraption. It certainly saved me from scraping things off the table and, preventing me from burning my fingers. And once you've built the sheaths, that it happens very quickly. The building or the roof just assembles very, very quickly, up to the point where I start to have problems with the ridge line. I do different sorts of things here, and I think the biggest challenge that I had was these nylon bristles are very, very hard. They don't fold very easily. So when I'm trying to fold them over the ridge line, it's just not working. I try different sorts of glues, hot glue, super glue, PVA, but it just becomes a big, terrible, messy situation that was very difficult to find, a workaround. There must be some sort of solution, and I'll keep playing with this because I would like to see the end result of this technique. We essentially have tiny little reeds here, as you would have on an actual thatched building. But after several different sorts of trial and error and techniques, and I glued at one point onto the top of the ridge a piece of wooden dowel, and I thought I could run a bead of hot glue along that and push some individual strands up against it, but nothing really was working out to the point where I was happy, and so I just ended up scrapping this nylon brush for the moment and moving on to the next project. I would like to see it working. Like I said, I think it would paint up really nicely, and because you have those individual strands, I think it's going to be a nice effect. I just need to spend a bit more time, but after spending hours and hours and hours, I just got frustrated and, gave up. I did see someone doing a very similar technique on Facebook quite some time ago, but I can't find that video, so if you've used this technique or could think of a way that I could finish that ridge line, that'd be great. Let me know in the comments. The next technique is to use some air drying clay. Now, I've done this in the past, and there's a video on my Rubbish In Rubbish Out channel, I'm pretty sure, where essentially I smush a whole bunch of air drying clay all over the roof and then brush it out with a comb. Now, I went to the $2 shop around the corner from the warehouse, from the studio, and bought a whole bunch of different sorts of brushes or combs, some kids' toys, some proper brushes, which I'm going to try different sorts of experiments with. And one of the big problems I've always had with air drying clay is that it doesn't matter how well I seal it up, it still dries out. So I'm using my vacuum air degasser thing to shrink up that package to make sure that it's good for me to use in the future instead of drying and becoming rock hard and unusable. To make the process easier, I score the roof, and that's very easy because, you know, this is an MDF building that, hopefully it's going to give a little bit of texture for the clay to grab onto. And just to make sure that it sticks on there, I'm going to throw some PVA all over the roof and then go ahead and smush on my air drying clay. I had originally thought that I'd do layers on this model, which is why I pushed the ruler in and created that dividing line. But after a little bit of thought, I decided not to, and I went ahead with the brush and just dragged it up and down the clay to create some sort of representation of thatching. It worked, but if I spent a little bit more time and had a bit more patience, it would be better. With the second technique out of the way, it was time to try something that I haven't personally done before, and that's using a regular bath towel as opposed to using teddy bear fur, which I've normally and have always done in the past. I've seen great results with this technique, and I was super excited to try it. Using my good fabric scissors, which I brought to the studio from home specifically for this purpose. No one else is allowed to use these scissors. They are mine. I go ahead and trim up the bath towel into little sections about 1.5 inches in width and long enough to extend over and wrap around the edge of the roof. It's simply then just a matter of gluing these onto the roof. I use some hot glue and build up the layers where each layer or each subsequent layer overlaps the one underneath it to help give us that decorative thatching that you see on some cottage buildings. This is a really easy process, and of the 3 different techniques I've tried so far, this is the one that I prefer, both in terms of building and the overall look at the end. I especially like how easy it was to do the ridge line with this technique, especially given the drama that I had earlier with the nylon bristles. This was just so easy, and it really helps finish off the building and complete that decorative look. Just as you would with a teddy bear thatching, you need to seal the bath towel with some PVA. Now, I start with a little bit of watered down isopropyl alcohol and spray that all over the bath towel just to help the glue absorb into the towel a little bit easier. And then using a really watered down PVA, I don't know what mix it was, maybe 1 part PVA to 5 parts water, I just go ahead and soak the whole building before coming back with the brushes and the combs and just messing around a little bit. I don't think that's really necessary because the bath towel has the perfect texture for this. Out of the 3 different sorts of techniques, it is my favorite. If I spend a little bit more time with the air drying clay, you can get very good results with that. And I do want to come back to the nylon bristles and finish that off and see what sort of result I can get. When I came into work the next day, I found all sorts of problems. The first thing I noticed was that the air drying clay that I used, now this was cheap stuff from Bunnings, had cracked really badly and fairly significantly along where I'd originally pushed the ruler, where I was thinking I'd create the ridged sort of effect that I have with the bath towel. I also noticed that the bath towel hadn't glued where I hadn't put glue, which I'm not sure why I'm surprised about that, but it was an easy fix. A little bit of super glue along the underside of that edge fixed that up pretty quickly. Despite the air dry clayed roof cracking really badly, I decided to paint that as well as the bath towel. Now both of them got painted exactly the same way. New thatching tends to be quite bright, Whereas old thatching, as it ages, it gets darker and darker and darker. And I wanted these buildings to be more aged, and so I chose a couple of different sorts of browns, a dark one and a more lightish tan for my highlight. Both of the buildings got painted in exactly the same way, but the end results are actually quite different. I used a stiff bristled brush. This is a hog hair brush that I'm using. I'm using that brush because I'm figuring I'm going to need something that's stiff to help me get into all the cracks and crevices, especially on the clay. To help the paint flow a little bit easier, I grabbed a cup of water and put splotches of paint all over the building, and then dipped my paintbrush into the water and then brushed it all over the building to help it get into all the cracks and crevices. Painting the bath towel was a bit of a challenge actually, and I'd recommend starting off either with a black undercoat through a spray can or a brown bath towel. Doing a quick dry brush as my highlight. On the bath towel it worked really well. I was really happy with this. I certainly think for the rest of the village I'm going to do the bath towel, depending on how other techniques that I try in the future turn out. Overall, for the 3 techniques that I've done so far, as I've said several times now, the bath towel is my favourite. I will come back to the nylon bristles and finish that off and see what I end up with. I can't wait to try a few more techniques, as well as come back and fix up that nylon roof, the nylon bristles. There must be some way to finish that ridge line. Thanks for tuning in. If you haven't already subscribed, we're way late in the video to tell you to subscribe, but please do click that like button if you did like the video, and subscribe if you want to see more videos in the future. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you soon. See ya.